I would like to welcome you all here, and it being late August before Labor Day, this is a wonderful crowd. This is fantastic. It's really cool. I'm Randy Kennedy. I'm the Director of Special Projects here at Hauser Wirth. What I wanted to do, we're going to read, but what I would like to do to start is just start with a short introduction to the life and work of Jack Whitten for those who might not be as familiar with him. Jack was born in Bessemer, Alabama in 1939, the son of a seamstress and a coal miner in a still viciously segregated South. After a brief period of studying medicine and wanting to be an Army doctor at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama in the late 50s, he decided that art was his destiny. He attended the Southern University in Baton Rouge, which he helped close down with a protest, and after that decided to go to New York and enroll in Cooper Union in 1960, which was a highly propitious time in New York where the Abex gods like Rothko and de Kooning and Newman still walked the earth, but the earth was splitting under their feet as pop and Abex emerged, and these ruptures were to help shape Whitten as a painter who conceived of painting as a kind of liberated object, existing in its own world, shaking off old boundaries between painting and sculpture. At a very young age, he was able to spend time around all of these Abex standard bearers, as well as the city's African-American art titans who were his heroes, such as Romare Bearden, Jacob Lawrence, and Norman Lewis, who were his predecessors in trying to negotiate the virtually unwinnable politics of being an artist and being an African American. Whitten struggled most of his life for proper recognition, but in reading this book, Notes from the Woodshed, which is the occasion for this talk, published by Hauser Wirth Publishers and edited by the wonderful Katie Siegel, it showed me that Jack, even on his worst, most self-doubting days, never seemed to have any essential doubt in the importance of what he was doing. So what I'd like to do to start off is introduce we'll all read, and I want to introduce the panelists who are here with us today, and then I'll start off by reading a selection, and we'll go down the line. So let's see, we're not in order here, but so Hettie Jones is best known for How I Became Hettie Jones, her memoir, The Beat Scene. She's published 26 books for children and adults, the first in 1971 and the most recent 2 years ago. Drive, her first poetry collection, won the Poetry Society of America's Norman Farber Award and was followed by All Told and Doing 70. She's written memoirs for others, including Rita Marley. She's taught fiction, poetry, and memoir in colleges and community settings from 1988 to 2002, she ran a weekly writing workshop at New York State's Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women. She's the former chair of Penn's Prison Writing Committee and currently teaches activist literature in the grad writing program at the New School and a writing workshop for women at the Howell Arts Gallery. She's just finished Full Tilt, a collection of new and selected poems, and Race Tracks, a story collection. She's lived in the East Village since before it acquired that name and has never considered moving. These are her words. Cullen Washington is an artist who uses the grid to communicate humanity and interconnectedness. He describes his collage abstract paintings as non-representational fields of activity. He's shown nationally and internationally. Some selected exhibitions include the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston, the Saatchi Gallery in London, the Studio Museum in Harlem, and the Academy of Arts and Letters here in New York. He's been a resident at the Studio Museum and at Skowhegan. He's a recipient of a Joan Mitchell Foundation Award, and he's in the collections of the Met, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Saatchi Gallery, the Joyner Jafrida Collection, and the Alexandria Museum of Art in Louisiana. And In 2008, will be a resident at the Joan Mitchell Foundation in New Orleans, and will be the inaugural artist in residence at Arc Athens in Athens, Greece, which is an appropriate connection for this. And finally, Courtney J. Martin is the Deputy Director and Chief Curator at the Dia Art Foundation, part of which is right across the street from us here. Prior to Dia, she was an assistant professor in the History of Art and Architecture department at Brown. She received a doctorate from Yale for her research on British art. In 2012, she curated Drop, Roll, Slide, Drip, Frank Bolling's Poured Paintings, 1973 to 78 at Tate Britain. And in 2015, Robert Ryman at Dia Chelsea, right here. And she's co-editor of Lawrence Alloway, critic and curator, and editor of Four Generations, the Joyner-Giuffrida collection of abstract art. This year, she will oversee exhibitions of works by Blinky Palermo, Keith Saunier, and Andy Warhol at Dia. I will start out reading some things that I came across in Jack's writings. And I would just like to start off by saying that I love this book for a lot of reasons. And first, it's because Whitten was a natural orator and storyteller with a kind of to me, a sort of at least for himself, an effortless seeming voice. And this is sort of a complicated question always with these sorts of things, but these notes that he kept really don't feel to me like those of a traditional journal or diary that the writer meant to publish or secretly hoped would be published, like John Cheever or Susan Sontag. They really, to me, seem more like the writing of someone trying to work out something for himself and having to write it down to examine his thoughts like theorems. Jack was deeply read in both philosophy and physics. And he seemed to think that those two things would bend back around to touch each other again the way they had not since probably the end of the Renaissance. And I think that possibility was really intriguing to him because he was always trying to get both a sense of how the entire universe worked and his place in it. And so he always thought big. And these readings will speak to that a bit. This is from November 12th of 1984. Yes, it's molecular, but you must learn to deal with the condensation of molecular structure, the layers that define consciousness. Experience is the key, the common denominator of being human. And then on the 26th of November, he writes, as long as I don't feel that the unconscious is dictating my actions, I am okay. There is definitely a role for conceptual thought, but it's not the whole picture. And then the next day, I have to put my shit on top of their shit, just like they put their shit on top of mine many moons ago. And then on December 4th of that same year, he writes, this constant knowing and not knowing is enough to drive the average person crazy. I guess that's why I'm not average. It's important that I test each quote-unquote feeling to separate that which is real from pure flirtation of excitement. Emotions become a problem. I have more than my share of emotional ecstasy. Sometimes I fear too much for a sincere evaluation of feeling. These 3 weeks have been most severe, draining. I am weak, sick with a cold, in need of M-O-N-E-Y. Surely there must be a better way. And then we fast forward to the winter of 2011, December 29th, the end of the year. Tell your particle physicists, your cosmologists, your astronomers, and everybody else who is studying the universe that dark matter is the glue that holds the universe together. Without dark matter, we will go back to the Big Bang. I am dark matter. Then 2 days later, I'm in a very bad mood. I burnt my spare ribs. Fantastic Heritage Farm spare ribs, and I burnt them. Mercini and Mary will be upset. I ask forgiveness. New Year's Eve, what do I wish for? Good health. Everything is possible with health. Then the next year in March 27th, I am a Mobius strip. I insist that soul and mind be the same thing. If all of us accept this proposition, it will cut through all the bullshit. Then the next day, March, I am a humanist first, and second, a Mobius strip. The most important is to be human. Everything else takes second place. Being human. I love, I hate, I fuck, I eat, I fish, I make, I feel, I hear, I touch, I see, I shit, I fear, I plant, I plow, I water, I conserve, I protect, I fight, I laugh, I cry, I wonder, I inspect, I choose, I run, I walk, I stand, I smell, I drink, I pray, I think, I speak, I play, I hunt, I suck, I sleep. Have I forgotten anything? If so, you understand my drift. And then finally, September 24th of 2013. I am back to not knowing. That is a very good thing. How could I possibly know? When Ron Gorchoff spoke of doubt, I was hard on him, but maybe he's onto something. Doubt could be a good thing. Meaning is a bitch. What does meaning mean? I'm too old for chasing riddles. My ass is floating, but that's okay. I am a good swimmer. And then the next day, Omphalos, a central point, a rounded stone in Apollo's temple at Delphi, regarded as the center of the world by ancients. I am the center of the universe. I am trying to locate the center of the universe. I found it in myself. And then we'll pass the torch on.
Okay.
And
well, here's
your
my
readings
torch.
are next.
Okay. Well, am I coming through? Can you hear me? I have a big voice without the microphone. But I'm a writer and responded always to Jack's work as, this is something else. And so I learned a lot from him. Anyway, I'm delighted to talk about his words. As a writer, the world of paint and depth and shape and everything else that goes into it, the hand itself, is new to me and exciting. When I read on page 49, the execution of shape plus field as one, the total organization of frameable space into surface material, I was enthralled, even if I didn't understand. And on page 51, I must have more earthy colors, darks, rusty, odd blues, rust orange, weird grays, and mud. Mud, mud, I love mud. This is a perfect example of what I've appreciated. Here's another from page 63. I had a long talk with Overstreet yesterday. It helped to clear a lot of things. Joe posed the question, what are you painting for? Money, love, pussy, power, humanity? And he insisted that I must pick one. Naturally, I took all of them and added one more, revenge. Now that I can understand. As I also understand on page 75, take Smithson's spiral jetty. He uses tons of dirt. I use paint. Art comes from everywhere. I can be a saint and make art. I can be a stone devil and make art. Because these ideas are applicable to all of us who, quote, make art, unquote, one way or another, it was with great relief that I read them. And another interesting relief was Jack's instinctive knowledge of his work and its place on the larger then current scene. This is from page 9091. Tomorrow night I am to speak on a panel entitled Abstract Expressionism, Its Continuation plus Transformation. I only want to get one thing clear. That is, abstract expressionism is as a movement is over with. Abstract expressionism is only an academic concern at this point in history. It has to be learned from, talked about, discussed in terms of nostalgia in an art history context for the art school classroom. Sorry. But it is not to be used for any serious experiment in the search for art, capital A-R-T. And anyone using abstract expressionism today, except for its founders, if any are alive, are only decorators. I just love it. I also appreciate, of course, the literary references. This is from page 94. Excuse me. Malraux, in Metamorphosis of the Gods, speaks of African sculpture as being, wait for it, let me turn the page, sorry. As being motivated by spirits. I am aware of the fact that this is the tradition in art which I must connect with, not the Western concept of the divine or sublime or romantic or classical, but a work of art with a function motivated by the tradition of African sculpture. My way, all caps, not Picasso's European interruption. I love that interruption. What interested me reading this was not only the reference, but the date, March 30th, 1975. These days, a reference to African art by an African-American artist would be perfectly acceptable, even ordinary to come across in a book. But as some of us who lived through that time are aware, the 70s didn't beat the 60s by much. And to determinedly, steadfastly set oneself on that course could either get you in trouble or let the world just pass you by. That Jack was dead serious about this can be seen again on page 104 from a year later, February 1976, when he wrote, I am emphasizing my being Black with the expectation of offering another sensibility, possibly another insight into African art other than that offered by Western Europe, which makes perfect sense now, doesn't it? But this insistence on placing himself didn't preclude his going deeper into self-awareness beyond race, into what plagues us all as we age. In March of that year, he tried to explain that his maturity as a painter lay not only in use of materials and technique and theory, but his maturation as a man. After, I love this, quote, the hot air of boyhood, that's a great one, page 109, what comes? But he did try to comfort himself with, quote, surely it's an ongoing process, for we are forever in a state of psychic metabolism. I thought that was a good generalization. And then he wonderfully came to the conclusion that most attracted me about this investigation, quote, hence, I further believe that we arrive at aesthetics through a profound use of our sensibilities in everyday thought and action. When I teach writing, I sometimes find it hard to convince students, young or old, that it is everyday thought and action that we have to look to and comment on and make sense of and consider. In other, quote, very few words, tell it like it is. But there's a lot in that everyday. And when Jack wrote about young people, what he wanted from them was that they take advantage of everything available. Like on page 113, The need for the Black artist to go all the way now, not stopping at social realism, but to press ahead and investigate what the world of the abstract has to offer. Now is the time for the Black artist to research the abstract, and not in the sense of duplicating past art schools and mannerisms, but personal experimentations in abstract thought. That's a long sentence, right? And I just love that he concludes this whole exploration on page 114 with, "A painting does not represent anything but itself. It shouldn't look like anything else or make for any illusions. A painting is a painting, just as a rose is a rose. May God bless Gertrude Stein." 2 years later, though, he began to explore the idea of systems through use of differing media, and what I, unfamiliar with the physical nature of all this, am nearly astonished by. Words are so like that. The word is always the same, but how and where and when it is used makes the difference. Like Jack's string and pieces of rag used to create thickness and shape. And he thought it important to list, quote, "the individual steps of my system," on page 118, 119. I am thoroughly amused by his use of Roman numerals, so very formal, but very worthwhile. X is last, and like they say today, wait for it, canvas stretched and hope for the best. Another aspect of Jack's ability was, to this writer's mind anyway, the very succinct way he described his reactions to the work of other painters. This description of the work of Jean-Michel Basquiat is from December 22nd, 1988, on page 197. "These paintings exist outside of art history. They're not formal, nor can I simply call them informal. They are about information, computer banks, similar to totem poles from primitive cultures. Jean-Michel is not a painter in the classical sense mode, but an urban folk artist, sophisticated, not naive. They are spontaneous, stream of consciousness, visual poems." Some of the handwritten words in this book are little treasures, such as this one from January 11th, 1994, written on the back of a guest check on the insert between 214 and 230, sort of the end. Quote, "I don't want the memory of life. I want the now of life." I say amen to that one. And to this from June 7th, 1995, on page 235, "I have plenty to think about. Tomorrow I leave for Agia Galini. The wood carving is calling me strongly. Hopefully my back will hold out and allow me to work, and then, in caps, gone fishing." This is followed the next year by another funny series beginning on page 242, 9th April. "I am the freest person on the planet. I have no baggage, no bones in the closet. Now more than ever before, it's crucial to put the magic back into painting. Pick ass O, no longer relevant," as in Picasso. "This is the 21st century, only I am relevant." 7th of May, "The formal issue in abstract painting today is not shape, surface, form, or content. The issue is space." 6th June, gone fishing. A little bit more. I want to skip ahead a few years because it's too easy to get lost in reading everything that Jack wrote down, and I have only a limited amount of time. The following and last piece I want to cover is from the very end of 2010 on page 367, 31 December 2010. "Improvisation, That is the jazz language. How the jazz musicians use the word. After many hours of conceptual structuring and intense knowledge of plasticity, both of theory and physicality of instrument and body, the jazz musicians let go into pure action. They are Zen people. I want this in painting. I arrive for this. I strive for this. I want pure action of the now. My materials are my instrument. 50 years of knowledge go into what I do. It's all compressed into paint, a synthesis of concreteness plus abstraction. I used to think that it was the gap between concreteness and abstraction, but this gap has been transcended. I am on my own now, all caps. I speak of jazz as analogy, which is correct, but science as analogy is also correct. Photography as analogy is also correct. More than one area defines what I am doing. Our present-day culture consists of more than one arena. Right on. I have chosen the right path. Happy New Year, Jack Whitten.
I feel like I should have been sitting in bed or something. Hey, you're reading me bedtime stories or something. It's really a delight to sit here with these esteemed guests and share thoughts about someone that I really looked up to for a long time. Jack is a giant. He killed a giant. And if I see further, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants. It's Isaac Newton. And Jack was a giant that, as an abstract painter, I stand on his shoulders. And so often when I was reading the book, it was like I was reading my own thoughts. And so in response to the thoughts, in response to his thoughts, I thought, why not write this like a collage painting? So I collaged his quotes along with my own thoughts, and when I finish with his quote, I'll say end quote. But to me, it was like kind of I'm continuing this legacy of what I think of as being abstraction or perceptualist abstraction, a momentary being when you're in front of the painting. So page 186, my paintings are about transcendence. I want them to transcend race, sex, object, and any idea of history. I want them to exist in a rarefied mental atmosphere, the psychic sphere, a space where only those who have penetrated the deepest levels of consciousness can fathom, end quote. The place of nothing and everything, powered by the unknown and the unseen, the spirit. It's the space where art exists, as perception and feeling, mind and being. In The Origin of Art, Martin Heidegger says, in the work of art, the truth of beings has set itself to work. Art lets truth originate, end quote. Here, we are not talking about the thingness of work, 4 planks of wood wrapped in cotton and lathered in plastic paint. Here, the truth exists in the beingness of the work, or as Jack puts it, in the perception of the mind. Page 146, quote, art must satisfy a very specific personal longing for universality, a desire to feel completely satisfied, a part of the total structure of things. Abstraction is the only possibility for this type of satisfaction. With figuration, we are forever depicting something other than the rock-bottom meaning of universality. For this technological age, abstraction is the language, end quote. In the world of data identities, abstraction, in its purest form, has no ties to political agenda. In the era of iPad, iPhone, iMac, abstraction can be the singular plurality representing a worldview. It can be the universal call for yes, we can. Page 251. What do I want? I want that which exists beyond the sexual, behind the narrative, beyond the ethnic, behind the autobiographical, beyond the political. I want that which is natural and holistic. I don't want Poussette's darts, cosmic transcendental wanderings, no new age philosophical ideas. It's better to have no ideas. I want that which is found, pure without ideology. Forget about blackness. Forget about whiteness. Any color will do, end quote. And so Whitten added paint skin to his black skin. It's just camouflage anyway, but if it's a mask, let it be African, the beautiful one. But abstraction is the taking away, so away with the mask. I wear no mask in the studio as ritual is performed, adorned with chrome boots and paint-crushed paints. I call to worship. I call and respond, conduit to spirit, within space and time allowing the happening, openness to intuitive intention. Page 156. Art is the only spiritual form that we can depend on. When politics goes amok, when organized religion becomes political, we can always depend on art to pull us through, end quote. Where categories become problematic, hierarchies become problematic. Edouard Glissant's Poetics of Relation brings this to light. Where identity becomes problematic, the ever-present strong cloud that overshadows artistic intent. Jack makes the case for abstraction as a cure, a savior, and anonymous humanity. Can non-representational abstraction be the metaphoric stand-in for anonymous humanity, for mind, for total subjectivity, no ego, dehistoricize? History is connected to objects. Remove the objectness of the image, and one can remove the history. After all, history is hazed, weighted to one side, and malleable according to who writes it. There is no truth there. With pure subjectivity, no past, no ground, fore, middle, or back. There is only flatness, verb in forever present tense. Space-time is locked there for the viewer to experience. Perception, spirit. Here something else can take place, a momentary peace, a conversation, a blind date, free of baggage, stories, drama, just being. Abstraction itself means the taking away or theft. It is the taking away of the materiality to reveal the immateriality, the what that lies beneath. And so what lies beneath? Mind formed into lines, dots, circles, squares, consciousness, matter, grids based on divinity. Malevich says art no longer cares to serve the state of religion. It no longer wishes to illustrate the history of manners. It wants to have nothing to do with object as such and believes that it can exist in and for itself without things. Page 421. We live in a quantum world. Everything is interrelated, end quote. This is the good gestalt. Without dominance and hierarchy, we have the essence of love. Love is exchange, giving and receiving. We're moving from a longitudinal to a latitudinal way of seeing humanity. We share the same roots. There is connection. This is the case of the grid, the connectedness to nature and all humanity. The worldview, as he states it, all things connected in constant exchange. With hierarchies, there is a focus on ers, smarter, richer, prettier, better, etc. With the grid, there is difference, but difference is equal. There is justice with the grid. There are no closed systems. Page 202. Nature is a single connected system of events unified by laws, end quote. the global view of reality, the perception of things interdependent on context. The suburb is connected to the projects, Democrat with Republican, poor to rich. But then ultimately, there is no need for sides because all is flat. This is the space Whitten talks about, the space bordered by the edge of canvas, but that extends on into infinity. The endless edge of the Campbell soup can in Warhol's works captures the edge of infinity, and so does the space in Whitten's works. And just like Campbell's soup, this space is good.
Did not have octopus, but I did not learn to catch snapping turtles by hand. I grew up with a bamboo fishing pole in one hand and a .22 caliber rifle in the other. In 1969, while hanging out in Crete, I saw a young Englishman using a diver's mask, and he invited me to try it. I'd only seen a diving mask in movies, but what I saw expanded my notion of nature as I knew it. I am now a certified scuba diver, but I can proudly say that I've never hunted a fish while wearing a tank. My passion is free-form diving using a mask, snorkel, weights, and fins. Hunting octopus is my favorite sport. Millions of years ago, the octopus had a shell, but slowly they lost it through the evolutionary process. Since then, the octopus is always looking for a home. They occupy the abandoned shells of other sea creatures, cans and car tires, or they make their own homes, which I call octopus architecture. They are extremely smart animals with fast reflexes and are masters of camouflage. They are the Houdini of the sea, and escape is their middle name. Being sly and elusive, they can open just about anything. Unfortunately, though, they are addicted to the color white like a bull is to red. They can't control themselves. Thus, I always keep a white handkerchief tucked into my wetsuit which I use to seduce them from their lair. When hunting for octopus, one must learn to recognize the morphology of the bottom of the sea. Octopus prefer a specific setting identifiable by a certain quality of stones, sand, and plant life. Octopus architecture is unique, constructed with stones, shell, wood, bits of sea glass, or anything available for building a nest. And of course, they prefer white stones. The nest is always semicircular and built at the base of a large rock, which serves as an anchor. They burrow a tunnel deep beneath the rock, usually with an exit for escape if attacked. The semicircular structure is built 5, 6, or 8 levels of rock high, depending on the size of the octopus. It is masonry without mortar, closely fitted, tight, and fortified. Most of the time, I only see the architecture. Octopus feed at night until early morning. During the day, they position themselves at the entrance of the nest, protecting their turf and soaking up the sun. When I locate an occupied octopus house, I can only see their eyes. I hunt octopus with a kamakai, a simple tool made of seasoned wild olive wood cut during a waning moon and left to dry for several years. A strong metal trident measuring 3 inches across and 6 or 7 inches long is then secured to a customized wooden shaft carved from a single limb with decorative carvings. The trident can't be too small or too large. This correct size allows me to penetrate the front door. The critical phase of the hunt is thrusting the trident directly between the eyes of the octopus. But I must stay cool and make sure that the trident is properly placed before attempting to pull the octopus from his house. Octopi are strong. Remember, they are all muscle with no bone structure. When hunting without a spear, I grab them by hand. I hold them tightly at the top of the head while being careful to prevent them from turning over. Directly beneath the head is a parrot-like beak capable of inflicting a vicious bite. I've been bitten more than once, and it is not fun. A nerve runs directly between their eyes. When no spear or knife is available, I must bite them between the eyes to sever this nerve and kill them because they can otherwise be extremely difficult to control. I have had large octopus wrap their tentacles up my arm all the way to my neck. But it's a weird feeling. And the welts from their suckers can last for weeks. After that nerve has been severed, I thrust my forefinger underneath the cap and invert the head. At the same time, I grab the larynx and pull the head, the liver, ink sac, and out with all the other innards. A large octopus can discharge enough ink to render a diameter of 2 or 3 meters of water to invisibility. When that happens, I am now surrounded by a cloud of black ink. I secure the octopus by threading a strong nylon string attached to a heavy wire through the head like threading a needle. Only then can I relax. I have successfully caught an octopus. The next step is easy. The octopus must be tenderized by slamming it against a large rock at least 100 times or more. When its natural color changes to white, I rinse it repeatedly in seawater and drag it back and forth over a rough rock surface with a rhythmic motion. A white foam is released, and this movement must continue until all of the foam disappears. When the muscle has completely relaxed, the texture of the flesh changes and the color turns to a grayish white. Then I grab 2 tentacles and pull them apart, gently. The flesh should tear apart. Then, and only then, is the octopus ready for cooking. Octopus may be cooked by grilling over the charcoal fire or a gas grill, boiled with herbs and served cold as a salad, in fresh tomato sauce, with pasta, or sun-dried as jerky or crissato, with olive oil, bay leaf, and red wine. For grilling, I hang the octopus outside in sunlight for a minimum of 2 days, which removes all of the excess water. Octopus can be sun-dried for weeks, which concentrates the flavors and preserves the flesh for many months. But crissato is my favorite recipe. Place the octopus in a covered pot with 1 cup olive oil, 3 fresh bay leaves, and allow to simmer in its own juice for 20 minutes. Pour in 1 cup of red wine. Here, I prefer a cheap, dry red wine with a full, robust flavor. Leave the pot covered for another 20 minutes and test with a fork for tenderness. Remove the lid and reduce the sauce to a rich, dark red cake color. The texture should have the sensual viscosity of cream. Crissato, when done right, should make your guests swoon. I've caught octopus in 1 meter and as deep as 20 meters of water. At 68 years old, I can still hunt comfortably at 20 meters. I remember once finding 2 octopi locked in mortal combat. They were literally eating each other to death. But then I caught and ate them both. Hunting octopus requires physical stamina, diving and breathing skills, tracking skills, and an unlimited passion for the hunt. Yes, at times I feel a pang of guilt in killing such a smart animal, But after the first taste of crossato, any notion of guilt dissolves into the vastness of the Libyan Sea. Jack's vivid description of stalking, diving, and conquering the octopus was curious to me. For someone who had once described conversations between and among painters as grunts and groans of yes and nos, never fully articulated beyond the level of, you know what I mean about that, I was surprised to find such fluidity and precision in his writing about spearfishing of all things. At the close of each year, before heading to Crete, he signed his studio logs unfailingly with the phrase, "Gone fishing." This colloquialism seemed to summarize a need to disengage from painting, from New York, from teaching, what have you. But it also seemed to acknowledge a shift from one kind of meaning-making to another one, which we now know is his sculptural practice, that which he took on while in Crete. Yet I think that his tale of the hunt for the octopi was also a metaphor about the process of painting, that he also described in his writing as equally fraught, hard-won, and ultimately totally gratifying. That spear is not unlike the developer that he used to make those paintings. As he reminds us, quote, "The painting is an organic object, one that cannot be separated from idea, from content, from process. The painting must always be seen within the context of forming," end quote. I think this is also true of the octopus.
I thought that maybe, hearing you read that reminded me that somebody once wrote of Moby Dick that it was the greatest how-to book ever written. And you think, like, in a way, like that narrative is kind of, it's like Jack's Moby Dick. It's amazing. I thought maybe the first super broad question that I would ask you all to talk about is, and Cullen had referred to this, Jack's work wasn't narrative in any conventional sense of the word, but his connection with language and with narrative, with storytelling. I mean, he could have easily been a writer. I mean, that's a very assured, the tone of that was so controlled in what he was doing, he could have been a writer. What do you think that the relation was in his own thinking between language and narrative, in a sense, and abstraction? How did he reconcile the two? Because he wasn't telling a story in a conventional sense in his work. And since we're talking really about a book that's a lifetime of writing, it's really interesting to me to think about what he was doing on the other side of language.
Well, I think he was bilingual in that painting is a language. It may not be lexical, but nonetheless, it's a way of communicating, and it may be esoteric, it may have a code, but at the same time, it's a language maybe even more dynamic than the verbal language. So I think he was speaking all the time, but speaking in two different modes, and even coming from two different impetus. One may be the intuitive, and the other one is the intellectual, left brain or right brain. But I think he was always speaking. I think reading the book, the writing was a way to try to translate what was done directly from the intuitive basis. So he was getting these visual messages, he made the work, and then he would try to write about it to understand what it was that he already knew. A place of knowing without verbalization. Yeah.
And as a writer, and having known him for as long as you've known him, what was your sense of the relationship between his connection with language and the visual?
Well, since I really had no idea that he kept such extensive diaries, and all of this work is new to me. It's a wonderful other part of Jack, but knowing him, he was a skinny guy with a big inside. And I do think that his writing just released something that he must have felt that he had to control, because I understand a little bit about painting, but I don't think you can be as opinionated as when you set down your thoughts, which are political, which are response to current events and an engagement with the world as it is. Painting is more, it seems to me, from the heart. And but these words were just a wonderful challenge to me to read, because I respect them so much. And now that I've read them, I know that they're there. And there's just more to Jack than anybody ever knew. And that makes me very happy.
And did reading these, you knew his speaking voice and you knew his storytelling abilities, and do these feel of a piece, or is there sort of a more, at times, I mean, especially with this, the piece, the octopus piece, like a literary tone there, or did reading these feel like hearing Jack sitting next to you talking?
Well, I think it was a combination of both, because some of what he writes could be published in a book, as you've done. But I mean, if it were ordered into a manual for young artists, it could go anywhere. It could inform a person who was looking for a faith in paint, in his art, and looking to establish his own self, his or her own self. And so he had that teacherly thing about him. If I can just, as an aside, I was teaching a class of my own one day when I said that I had to go to the memorial service for Jack. And one of my students, who I knew was a visual artist, said, "Oh, no, Jack Whitten died? Oh, no, he was my favorite teacher." So you don't get to be somebody's favorite teacher without having imparted something and inspired young people. And I think he had that aspect to his writing. So, he's a multifaceted person. But I think, I get asked like a question like, what is your writing voice and what is your own voice? But his voice is his voice. It's all of him. You can have one voice that serves for everything, and it goes a lot of different ways. We walk on the same 2 feet all the time. Go different places.
Courtney, do you have any thoughts about that relation between language, with Jack's engagement with language, and what he did in painting and now in sculpture?
Well, I think it's interesting that he spends, first of all, he spends a lot of time saying how horrible art historians are. I mean, who couldn't, disagree with that? But, he does so in a way that's fascinating, because he's, in one, kind of list, he's quoting Regal, and then he switches and turns Regal onto Shapiro. And I think, well, isn't that amazing that there you are sitting right in the middle of Western art history, and it's driving at you, but you're driving at it from the middle of it. And I think that there's probably no other way to do that kind of work other than to write it out, because it doesn't actually need to infect the painting. The painting needs to be clear of that, actually. And I think the writing in some ways is like I don't mean refuse in the sense that there's something wrong or bad about it, but I mean refuse in the sense that it is the extra that he is also dealing with, and that doesn't need to be inside the work itself, because the work needs to be clear of rhetoric. And so writing becomes the place. Writing can be full of rhetoric. And so he can do what he wants and shape those conversations and be at odds with himself, God is great on one day, there is no need for God. Painting is God the next day. You know, you can have all of that, but that can only happen in writing. That does not need to happen in his paintings. And I think he's very clear about the boundaries between the two, which is useful.
There was, I remember one anecdote in here where he talks about, or somebody talks about him as a young painter being criticized for not quite knowing what he was doing, and he ran into de Kooning, and de Kooning said, "You go tell that motherfucker that there are no accidents in painting." And I wonder, in the need to write, whether he knew that, and there was something on the language side of it that needed to try to figure out that there were accidents, but he needed to figure out what they were or get some sense of them. Yet it also seems like at times here he's careful about trying to go too far and explain away something that's powerful for him on the art side. And do you have thoughts about that, about him trying to use language to, I don't know, to figure out what the accidents were or how to use them?
Well, you know, I think that was one of the reasons he set out his Roman numeral systems, which I was so taken with, because he wanted to clarify for himself exactly what went there when it did go there. And to either prevent the accident, or if the accident happened, make another system. You know, I think he had a kind of flexibility that allowed him, and through language, I discovered this because I don't really have any knowledge of what an accident is in painting. I look at a painting and it's gorgeous, you know. But I have no knowledge of the process. But the reading about that systematic idea is very interesting to see. Somebody is so involved in how I do it makes sense to me, and that is, you know, that's a literary thing about you know, we all write with words, but how you use the words in that sentence makes all the difference in the world. So that's how I think he did it. You know, and that's the translation that I can make of it.
I was at this residency, Yado, and it's, you have visual artists, and you have composers, and you have poetry, and filmmakers, and so it's an interesting mix. So there was one, I can't remember her name, but she was she wrote poetry, and when she would write the poetry, but then there would be a part where there wasn't a word, it would be a line. And so how do you say that? Because it's an image. So it was like an anomaly. And so she would read it, but then when it got to the glyph, when it got to the graphic, she would just pause. But if you're reading it along with her, if you're looking at it, you see it. And so then word became visual in a different way, like in its root way, as words were once pictures. So I think that I'm thinking about language as the sentence, as the system, and then the accident is the line that happens. It's the anomaly that happens, and so then you have to reconcile. What do I do with that? Is that this kind of dynamic change that shoots me off into a different direction, or do I just sit with it and let it be?
He talks, and you mentioned this earlier, but he talks a lot about, Greenberg, for example, and he came to the city at a time when, that sort of historicism and that the reign of somebody like Greenberg was still so incredibly powerful. But do you have a sense that he also felt the need to write this because so much of what was going on in the making of art at that point was philosophical? I mean, it was about where history is going, and that he felt a need to contend with that, if only in the privacy of his own journal.
Maybe. I think we've lost that period of time in some way. We're out of it. Maybe not lost, because I don't know that anybody's mourning it in that same way. But I think we're out of a period of time where the voice of the critic has the same kind of feel that it would have had for him in late 50s, early 60s, and then well into the 70s. I think that what he's writing against, I think you even see it in the sort of conversation that he's having with the figurative people, and I took that to mean what is expected of him and those that came before him generationally, and then on the other side, the conceptual people, which is interesting to hear Jack be so vehement about something like concept, given that that's so much of what is a part of his writing, is actually writing out his own concepts and giving them maybe only to himself at the time. But I think that sense that actually that one needs to go home and scream back at the critics is very real, or was very real. And those people were real people that he saw on the streets, people that he saw at openings, people that had talked to his friends, or the people that did or didn't talk to him. I mean, critics were then real figures, and maybe that this voice that we hear here sometimes that comes out that seems like it is stronger, seems like it has this real kind of venom to it, is saying something that otherwise isn't going to be said in public. Yelling back at the critic would not have gained you criticism, and that was the thing that you might have needed or might have wanted.
I'm glad you mentioned, if I may jump in, suddenly I remember when I was a young woman, I worked at the Partisan Review, and where the name Clement Greenberg was very large. And all I could think of was, oh, it's stifling. It just felt, I knew nothing about it, but it was trying to stop everybody that I knew and who was trying. And I remember that it just felt like it was a culture war going on, and everyone that I knew was sort of rising, and these people were saying, no. But that's the way it felt to me.
Well,
but I think that's the way it came across.
Well, I remember, like, Barbara Rose once wrote, about that sort of Greenbergian, rigidness. She said, we were all on the choo-choo train, and we didn't know exactly where it was going, but it was only going one place. And then, of course, it stopped, or it ran off the rails, and it went, 100 different places.
Yeah.
But it feels like, to me, in some places in this book, it's Jack engaging with either Greenberg or doctrinarian people like that, just in the privacy of his own mind at night, working it out for himself.
Because I think that talking to other painters about it was an endless circle of frustration. Because, when he talks about not at times wanting to be with people, then he talks about having had good times with people, I think that maybe what he's trying to resist is the moment of complaint, of kvetching, of being in this space where you talk about all of these things that you don't have, like the criticism that you want. And so to have space from that, I think, is something that he's looking for, and only on the page to himself can he have that real conversation that he wants to have.
What I had mentioned this at the very beginning, but what's the sense that you have, like, if you didn't know anything, what's the sense you'd have coming to this as a reader about whether he really wanted these, from the beginning, that he wanted these words to be read the way we're reading them today between covers, or whether they were essentially private?
Well,
I mean, for so many
They aren't
books
anymore.
like this, it's a really intriguing question. And whether anybody really commits words to paper for this long and saves them without thinking that they'll eventually, if they don't burn them, thinking they'll eventually be read by a public. What do you think he wanted? Or I mean, we know what he ultimately wanted, but through the course of it.
I'm sorry for talking over you, but I I have saved certain things that I wrote when I was in my 20s and 30s, and without thinking about publishing them, and maybe I hope they'll never be found. I don't know. I'm two minds about it, and I'm still alive. But the point being, it's the precious youth of yourself that you want to save. And even looking back on it, you begin to appreciate and love yourself as you grew. And if he did look back on what he had written when he was younger, it informed him and must have delighted him that it was also good, the way it seems to be delighting us all. And I can't imagine Jack not appreciating some part of himself. If he can write something as wonderful as the essay that you did, I have to send it to anyone who's an octopus eater. But just in terms of saving, even if you don't want to publish it, you want it there so in honor of yourself. Maybe that's what it is. Yeah, that's in honor.
And because it's over a period of time, I think maybe initially he was writing it for himself. And then towards the end, you see he starts to give this kind of roadmap. Like if you want to make it as an artist, this is what you do. Step 1, step 2. It becomes a pedagogy of how to make it or how to do perceptualist painting or because now he's looking back really as opposed to looking forward, I think, in terms of his writing. I'm glad he wrote it. I mean, it's a great saga, and it's funny because artists live in between this kind of, you may not have money, but the people you meet do. So how does that work? You know what I mean? And it's the art that helps you navigate through this. But there's one part towards the end where he says, "I don't need anything anymore." It's like I've made it. It's one time that I don't need anything. He's happy with his family. It sounds very content. And that towards the end of the book.
Well, if you don't feel content, you're in trouble.
Maybe we should open it up for questions. We have a great crowd here. So if anybody out there has any questions at all.
Was he working for Jeff then?
No,
He wasn't. Yeah.
He was working for a display company, Martin Silver, who died a few years ago. But he would sometimes go 3 o'clock in the morning, and he would do wooden plaques of 150 images of an early American little child holding a cat. So he would lay out 150 of these plaques, all prepared, and you go through and you do all the eyes, and then you do all the lips, and then he's very good at lips. So he had systems even for doing that kind of display work. He thought of it conceptually. And I also have to say that in his studio, if I was in the studio, he would have a clipboard with his logs. They were loose pages. There was not notebooks. And if I happened to be standing there, these were not for reading. I mean, if I stood there, I would read what he was writing.
If reading through the book, you start to see his thinking shift. What I like about Jack is that he was always about interrogating and questioning, and he was always seemingly unsettled and content with what was present, which caused him to go further and push further. You start to see a shift in his thinking and also a shift in process. So process, I think, either ran subsequent or parallel with the philosophical kind of component. So the philosophy behind what he was doing was at the core, and then the process and so he was always changing processes, right? So he went to the Xerox, company, and he came back with new materials, and he tried this out. He built the panel on the floor and did the raking, created his own tools, and then he would do away with the grid and then come back to it. So I think what you're seeing is that this evolution, or maybe this, and at one time he was about experimentation. And so maybe the first half of the book, he's talking more about process, and in the second half of the book, he's talking maybe more about philosophical concerns, right? And so you can see that his focus is shifting, like, okay, I have the process down. Now let me make sure that the ground that I'm standing on is solid ground. And so I think what you're seeing is this shift in thinking, a shift in focus and a shift in processes that maybe just happens just because of his kind of device of interrogation and questioning of what he was doing.
Yes.
You spoke a little bit about, well, Washington spoke a little bit about residency that he was doing in Greece, and you made a comment about how significant that was. Can you speak a little bit about how significant the Greek experience was for Jack?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can speak about it from my reading, but I think there are others here much more highly qualified to speak about it.
I'm not writing a book. Maybe later. We really went to Greece for me in the beginning because I'm Greek and I'd never been there, and I sort of hated being Greek when I was a kid. I wanted to be American. So I didn't want to speak that language. I didn't want to be involved with it. But I had to get it out of my system. So Jack and I went, but then he had this dream about finding this tree and carving this tree, and all of a sudden we made friends. Yeah, that's the man whose property the tree was on. So, you know, we went one year, and then the next year, well, what are we going to do for the summer? We got to get out of New York. It's really horrible. And why don't we go back to Greece? But we were renting houses for $12 a month. And we were living literally on $4 or $5 a day with wine. So there were a lot of attractions for going there, not just the wood carving.
Right.
So it became self-perpetuating. After a while, you make friends. You love them. They love you. You have, every summer we had an amazing, transcendental experience, unexpected wonders. So it pulls you back all the time.
Okay. Well, oh, yeah.
Just for y'all on the panel, I mean, do you think you can still be an artist? I mean, do you think it's too hard to be an artist in New York? Do you feel like it's still possible to be an artist in New York? Or are the pressures just of living here, you know, do you think it's over? Do you think being an artist and living in New York and working is like those days were the 80s and 90s and it's gone?
So I'm not an artist at all. I'm an art historian. And I would say that there is not a period in New York from the moment at which someone like, you know, Thomas Cole arrived from the Midlands in London to the point at which someone like Jack arrives from, you know, southern by way of Tuskegee, that living in New York has not been hard. I think that's part of its appeal, is like conquering the dragon. And I'm not trying to belittle what people go through, because I think, in fact, everybody who moves here goes through some degree of it. It's difficult. It's hot at times. Even when it's not hot, it's too cold. It's dirty. It's disgusting. We live with rats. We pay millions of dollars to live with rats. And I think, but I say that though in a way that I want to make clear that I think that what Jack experienced was unbelievably horrible at times. I have this sense of it, and I have this sense of it not just by the things that he wrote, but by the things that went unstated. When he talks about the anecdote about seeing de Kooning on the street, and de Kooning spoke to him and says, you know, hey kid, and gives him a word one day, it was the one acknowledgement that he was okay for that day, whether or not he had enough to eat, whether or not he had enough to really survive this. You know, I don't know that we can look at a time and think it looks better or worse. I think we can just look at time and think, well, this is our time. And I think that's the only way you can really live with it. But you can also look at all of these things that happened around that time. It is not by chance, I think, that Jack ends up in Greece. It's not by chance that someone like Robert Bearden gets stuck in Paris for way too long and won't come back to New York until he absolutely has to. It is not by chance that, you know, that Norman Lewis dreams desperately of going to Barbados, where his parents were from. I think that that's always, the idea of escape from New York is just as important as the idea of being embedded in it.
So stay, that's the idea.
All right, I think. Yeah.